No, sir. Other than I'm glad to finally be given the opportunity to plead guilty. I am happy to be pleading guilty to these charges for a number of reasons.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor,
Yes, sir.
I am guilty, and yes, sir, I believe that I would be found guilty.
we would also withdraw our motion for recusal, so we can proceed with you being the judge on this matter.
At this point, how do you plead?
I plead guilty, Your Honor.
All right.
Welcome back to the deep dive of Alex Murdaugh's plea hearing. This is part 2, so if you haven't watched part 1, you should go back and watch that first to catch up. But today, we're going to pick up where we left off when Judge Newman mentioned the Victim's Bill of Rights. So before we listen to more of the hearing, we're going to talk about that. So let's get started. This is Legal Updates with Cassidy. Deep dive of Alex Murdaugh's plea hearing, part 2. What's the Victim's Bill of Rights, and how can it affect his sentence? Welcome. Before we get started today, I want to send some YouTube love to His Honor Judge Newman's wife and daughter for showing up in the front row for him for this hearing. As you probably already know, they lost a son shortly before the murder trial, but Judge Newman went to work every day and did his duty in spite of his heartache. And Mrs. Newman sat in that courtroom every day, something she had never done before in his long career. They gave each other the strength they both needed to get through those days. Judge Newman's daughter is also a judge, and I've read that they even share chambers. This is a close and beautiful family. Seeing them there supporting him is everything. I call my channel Judge Newman's unofficial fan club, and seeing him accused, maligned, and disrespected has irked us all. Imagine how much it hurts his loved ones. So while Dick, Jim, and Alex brought their disrespectful selves to this courtroom days after speaking out against him and filing their poison motions, how absolutely sweet it must have been for Judge Newman to have two of the people he loves most in this world sitting there, canceling all the evil coming off of that defense table. When he leaves the courtroom every day, he has this family to go home to, and that says so much. The Victim's Bill of Rights. What is it? In 1984, Congress passed the Victims of Crime Act that was amended in 1988. That was set up to assist victims of crime in many ways, from restitution to protection, counseling, to be informed before their offender is released or if they escape. So many things. After this was passed federally, all states have added this into their constitution or enacted some form of rights for victims. In South Carolina, the Victim's Bill of Rights was passed on January 22, 1998. Besides the things I mentioned, it also grants victims a right to be heard before sentencing. What we're going to focus on today is points 3 to 5 from South Carolina's Victim's Bill of Rights. Number 3. They have a right to be informed of and present at any criminal proceedings which are dispositive of the charges where the defendant has the right to be present. Number 4, be reasonably informed of and be allowed to submit either a written or oral statement at all hearings affecting bond or bail. And number 5, be heard at any proceeding involving a post-arrest release decision, a plea, or sentencing. We've seen this at Corey's sentence hearing when Tony Satterfield spoke and when Justin Bamberg spoke on behalf of Miss Pinckney. These statements are generally given at the sentence hearing before the sentence is read and becomes official. The most famous case of victim impact statements was the Larry Nassar trial a few years ago in Ingham County, Michigan. My favorite female judge, Rosemarie Aquilina, gave the best judge's statement I've ever heard. I'll link it in comments. If you didn't see it, please watch it. She speaks for women, and it was amazing. she allowed every single victim of Nassar a chance to speak, uninterrupted and uncensored. It took 9 days for the 204 victims of Larry Nassar's abuse to give their victim impact statements in courtrooms in Ingham and Eaton counties. It was very emotional and very moving, and hopefully gave those women and girls a step in their healing process. According to studies, these statements do have impact on sentencing. In this case, they cannot affect the time served directly, and by that, I mean Alex's plea agreement is very specific. Instead of the wording of up to a given number of years, it's a very specific number. So Judge Newman has to either accept the plea as it is or refuse it completely. If he refuses it, it will be withdrawn and will go to trial unless another agreement can be made and accepted. Though rare, it does happen. An older but famous rejection was for Al Capone, and a recent one involved Hunter Biden. A lot of this decision hangs on the victim impact statements. There are a number of victims here, and if the majority do not feel this is enough of a punishment and voice it, it can affect a judge's decision. This can even happen without victim impact statements. In the 2016 case of Sheriff Lee Baca, a plea agreement was written up and signed by both sides of counsel. Though Baca was 74 and in the early stages of Alzheimer's, the judge simply felt 6 months was way too little time for his crimes. Judge Percy Anderson rejected the plea, saying the maximum sentence of 6 months included in the deal for lying to authorities investigating jail beatings was too lenient for his gross abuse of the public's trust. After this rejection, Baca was sentenced to 36 months in May of 2017. Last year, a judge rejected a plea agreement for the men convicted of murdering Ahmaud Arbery. On February 23, 2020, Ahmaud was jogging in Glenn County, Georgia, when 3 men in 2 separate vehicles started chasing him. Ahmaud was black, these men white, and they didn't feel he belonged in their neighborhood. A father and son, Greg and Travis McMichael, in one vehicle, had a gun, and a neighbor of theirs, Roddy Bryan, in another. After chasing him for some time, they used their vehicles to block his way and got out of their cars. Roddy filmed while Travis got out of his vehicle and pointed his gun on Ahmaud. Ahmaud approached and an altercation began, with Travis fatally shooting him. They claimed they thought he was a burglar. Greg McMichael had ties to law enforcement, which made their arrest take months to happen. After they were convicted of murder in state court and given life sentences, they had an upcoming federal trial, and a deal was struck between counsels to serve 30 years in federal court instead of state court if they admitted it was a racially motivated murder. Ahmaud's family angrily objected to the deal, largely because federal prisons are generally considered less brutal environments than state prisons. Judge Wood agreed and rejected the plea deal. Another instance was in May of 2021 when U.S. District Judge Theodore Chuang rejected a plea agreement that called for 15 to 21 years in prison for Eric Marquis, a man described as the world's largest purveyor of child pornography. Judges are not bound by the terms of plea deals, and Judge Chuang just could not agree with them, saying it's too flawed, and I also don't agree with the outcome. The deal wanted to include the 6 years he'd spent in prison in Ireland before being extradited to the U.S. to face charges in Maryland. I want a sentence higher than that, Chuang added. It's not going to be 21 minus 6 to 15. That's not going to happen. I don't have to follow what you all did. It's clear neither of you really understood what you were doing. He felt Marquis deserved a longer sentence for operating a web hosting service that enabled users to anonymously access millions of illicit images and videos, many depicting the rape and torture of infants and toddlers. He held dual citizenship and used a server in France to host more than 200 websites where these things could be downloaded. Judge Chuang, You are one of us indeed. And we are your unofficial fan club too. Another case in Tulsa, Oklahoma was denied in July of 2021, and here's a clip for that one.
The family of a 42-year-old man who was murdered is glad the suspect was not allowed to do a plea deal. Instead, a federal judge ordered him to stand trial. News on 6's Kristen Weaver talked with the family tonight and is live with the story. Kristen?
Well, Ashley, Daniel Morgan's cousin tells me they went to court thinking the suspect was going to get a plea deal. So they were overjoyed when the judge said no.
It'll be a year, July 25th, and it's been the hardest year.
Mary says Daniel was the kind of guy everyone wanted to be around. He was a father of 5 who loved God and would do anything for anyone. Court documents say Kyle Sago went to visit Daniel last July and then came back later to talk some business. And that's when Sago shot and killed Daniel. The plea agreement called for Sago to plead guilty to second-degree murder and get a 25-year prison sentence. But Judge Gregory Frizzell turned down the plea and ordered Sago to go on trial for first-degree murder in September.
The judge believes that there's enough evidence to prove premeditation.
Mary says her family was shocked and beyond happy. She says they plan on being at that trial and they're hoping for justice for Daniel. Now, Sago's attorney, Heath Hyde, tells me he understands the judge's decision and he looks forward to defending Sago in September.
So, back to the question. Can the victim's Bill of Rights affect the sentence? Yes, it absolutely can. Should Judge Newman, after hearing the victim impact statements, decide that the plea is not enough, he can exercise his right to reject it, leaving Alex to withdraw his plea and face the trials or come up with a better plea. I know this would be a huge burden on the state, but if his murder appeals were passed and we knew what the federal sentence would be, I might feel differently. But as for right now, not knowing how things are going to go with his motion for a new trial, or his appeals, or the federal sentencing, the bigger part of me wishes this would go to trial, or that this sentence would be rejected and replaced with a longer one. But, like I said, no one asked me. Back to this hearing now. Alex officially enters his guilty plea, and Creighton starts to give his factual basis. Factual basis is the third step in a plea hearing. We've covered the first 2 in part 1. Remember the word colloquy? Those times that Alex was sworn in and stood before the court and answered Judge Newman's questions? They were on the record, fulfilling these requirements. The third one being factual basis. At this time, the prosecutor will put the facts of the case before the court for the judge to understand why and what the defendant is pleading guilty to. In this case, it's a formality, since Judge Newman is well acquainted with this case. In other lesser-known cases, a judge might be seeing a defendant for the first time or have little knowledge of the case, and so this is a requirement for them to decide whether a sentence is fair and just. So as Creighton gives factual basis, he starts by thanking his team and thanking all of the victims who came forward in spite of their fears at speaking against Alex. Then he speaks about how Alex was able to do all of these crimes.
The one thing, the one word that came out over and over again was trust. Was trust. It's what I heard over and over again. And I think that's the heart of this case. It is the trust that comes with having that law license on the wall. It is the trust that comes with being part of a powerful family. It is trust that comes with building a powerful practice. But it is also that trust that comes with the fact of how these schemes typically worked. And the way they worked is that when Alec Murdaugh would bring those individuals in to sign the paperwork, to look at a disbursement sheet that had out all the various disbursements that were coming from these cases, in most instances, he was still handing them a really big check. And it was easy for him. It was so easy for him to smooth talk and fast talk them through these disbursement statements because he's handing them that big check. And what they didn't realize was that at the same time, he was taking money from them, sizable portions of money from them, behind his back.
Then he talks about the entitlement that Alex felt when taking their money. And this is something that Alex himself mentioned during the murder trial.
You know, one of the self-justifications that I talked about, Mr. Waters, was I may ask a partner, okay, how much is this case worth? And if one of my partners, and I may not even give them all the real facts, okay? So if they said this case is worth $100,000, okay, and I go out and I get them $300,000, you know, that's one of the stupid little things. Okay, well, this isn't the same. And that's one of those justifications that I used in looking back on this that I don't.
And I think as we develop this case, that ultimately what it really boiled down to was such a sense of entitlement and lack of accountability that Mr. Murdaugh felt he was entitled to that money. And so he took it.
This next clip is just for giggles, but as Creighton is talking, Dick is trying to stay awake, Alex is sitting quietly, smiling from time to time, but Jim, who every time he's asked has nothing to add, is busy typing away on his laptop. And I can't help but wonder, is he working another case there? Is he double billing right now? And I really wish I could ask the lovely lady behind him what she sees on his screen, because it sure has her interest too. Next, Creighton does a rundown of each of Alex's victims. He states all the facts, and now it's time for the final colloquy, where the court makes sure the defendant understands and admits to the accusations that have been laid out in the factual basis.
Mr. Murdaugh, aside from the count or the indictment that you are pleading guilty on the Alford, aside from that particular one, do you disagree with any of the facts stated by Mr. Waters?
I agree that I wrongly took all of that money, Your Honor, and did all of those crimes. I disagree with some of the narrative, but not the essential elements of the facts of the crimes.
And here's my irk moment for today. I disagree with some of the narrative. Show some remorse for once in your life, Alex.
Do you believe that if you were to proceed with a jury trial on these charges that you would be found guilty?
I am guilty, and yes, sir, I believe that I would be found guilty.
All right. Mr. Harpootlian, Mr. Griffin?
Nothing, Your Honor.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything else with regard to the guilty plea that you'd like to say today, Mr. Murdaugh?
Other defendants like to use this opportunity to express their remorse and apologize or even read a statement like Corey Fleming did. Not Alex.
No, sir, other than I'm glad to finally be given the opportunity to plead guilty. I am happy to be pleading guilty to these charges.
I'm glad to finally be given the opportunity to plead guilty. Finally be given the opportunity to plead guilty. Can we review the things he's done for the past several months to avoid pleading guilty? First, he chose to enter a not guilty plea right off the bat. No one made him do that. Second, in the Satterfield case, which is the one that was on the docket for the 28th of this month, he had already filed a confession of judgment back on May 31st of 2022. We see the document here with his signature. And just as it says here in this document, it's an admission of liability, a confession, and the amount of damages that was agreed on. This kind of document is used to circumvent normal court proceedings. It helps to avoid a lengthy legal process to resolve a dispute. And when you sign these, you forfeit any rights to dispute the claim in the future. So this should have been resolved back then, but no. Alex spent this past summer doing everything he could to take this back. After claiming for years that the dogs tripped Gloria, something Maggie and Paul also stated on record, and I've covered a lot of this information in previous podcasts, and I'm linking them all in comments. But a year after this confession, on May 16th of this year, he suddenly files this 27-page motion claiming that he, and this would also include Maggie and Paul because they backed this up, that he lied about the dogs and that the dogs weren't there, and he tries to get the court to let him take it all back. That failed, of course. Then, at his lowest of low points, he even filed a motion, and I covered this in depth. He actually filed a motion to compel joinder or dismiss for failure to join necessary parties. The necessary parties? Gloria's sons, the ones he stole the most money from. This motion told the court that since her sons were awarded money to make up for the money he stole from them, that either the court must join them to the lawsuit so that they could pay the money back, or else drop the case entirely. That was his demand, not quite 5 months ago. But yes, Alex, you're so glad to finally be able to plead guilty. But that didn't work either. Of course, the court denied it. So since then, he's been doing everything he could to stall the process. At a hearing in September, Dick was barking, "What's the hurry?"
What's the hurry? That's the other point. What is the hurry?
Something he repeated in his motion just days before this plea hearing we're watching now. But yeah, we're supposed to believe Alex when he says, "I'm glad to finally be able to plead guilty." What was stopping you, Alex? What was making you victimize your victims over and over again all this time that's suddenly out of your way so you can freely plead guilty? Or does this have something to do with Becky Hill's son being arrested and the probes into misconduct ordered by Duffy Stone? Duffy Stone, you know, longtime friend of the Murdaughs. Did you get an ace up your sleeve to play later, so now you're suddenly not worried about pleading guilty? Okay, calm down, Cassidy. I am irked. Are you irked with me? So, deep breaths. The hearing concludes with Judge Newman saying the plea will not be accepted until after hearing the witness statements, but that at this point, he does fully intend to do so. So that leaves us to wait until next Tuesday to see just what the court will decide after hearing those statements. And now, I need to go pet a puppy or a pony or hold a baby, something like that to calm down after all that. I will, of course, keep you posted with my deep dive after that hearing on Tuesday. I'm sure it will be televised so we can all watch it, and I will deep dive it as well so we can discuss it together like this. I'm going to try to get my next one out before then, so I'll talk to you here again soon. And in the last live chat, someone called the chat Cassidy's Crew, and I love that so much. So, to Cassidy's Crew, have a wonderful weekend. Until next time, this is Cassidy O'Connell saying stay well and stay tuned.